Okay, after test conceptualization and test construction, the next phase of test development is tryout. So after we already generate items in our item pool, we basically have a tentative items or tentative test with a proper response formats and a proper layout. So then what we need to do is we need to test these items whether they demonstrate quality criteria or not. So when we do the test tryout, basically we want to collect data. So we need to pay attention to three important aspects. The first one, the subject characteristics, the backgrounds of the people that we approach to answer, to respond, to participate in our tryouts. Secondly, what is the adequate sample size? How many people need to participate in these tryouts? And the third aspect is to make sure that a proper testing conditions. So let's discuss in more detail one by one. So for the first one, under test tryout, we need to look at the similar characteristic of subjects. And then we need to make sure that the sample size is adequate, and we have to make sure that the testing condition is identical. For the similar characteristic of the subjects, test developer need to recruit respondents that match the relevant characteristic of the target populations. So I always find that, especially in research, people when they develop a test, so the test intended for school children, for example, from the age of 13 years old to 18 years old. But researchers are still students, okay, bachelor's degree students, postgraduate students. So they don't have the capacity to go and find school children to answer their tryout. So what they did, so they do their tryouts at the universities and ask university students to respond to their newly developed test. Bear in mind, if they do this, they may not be able to acquire meaningful data. Why? Because the characteristic of their target populations is not the same as the characteristic of people who answer the tryout. Okay, so here, people who participate in the tryout must have matching characteristics. If we develop a test for single mothers, you need to go and find single mothers. If you develop a test for school children, you need to go and find school children. If you develop a test for working adults, then you need to go and find working adults. Another important aspect that we have to make sure during test tryout is adequate sample size. Okay, it should not be very few because it will not allow us to do the analysis that we need to do in the item analysis procedures. So what is the adequate sample size? The rule of thumb for sample size according to cohort is between 5 to 10 respondents or subject for each items. So let's say we take 10. So if we develop item or 30 items, okay, and then if we want to estimate the sample size, we have to multiply by 10. So we have to go and find 300 participants to answer our test. Okay, if we take 5, then it's only going to be half, 150 to participants that you need to respond to our newly developed test. Okay, however, this is only the rule of thumbs. The more the subjects in the tryouts, the better to minimize chance error and phantom factors in subsequent data analysis. So researchers, test development experts are always encourage us to find more participants. Okay, but here the usage or the application of rule of thumb has been criticized because of why it usually leads to overestimation or underestimation of sample size requirements. Overestimations meaning that it actually requires only 100 data, but we go and find 300 data, for example. Underestimations because we want to use a more advanced analysis, for example, structural equation modeling require minimum of 400, we only gather 300 data, which is underestimations. So the use of rule of thumb I always receive criticisms as a problematic methods because it leads to over or underestimation of sample size requirements. So the decisions on sample size depends on both theoretical and practical considerations. The number of the sample should adequately represent the population and to be sufficient enough to allow proper item analysis to be carried out. So here we also need to look at what type of analysis in the next stage that we want to perform. Okay, we have to go and look what are the assumptions of those analyses, and these assumptions does relate to sample size. If it does, then what are the required sample size that we need to find in order for us to run the analysis. And another important factor under tryouts is to make sure this testing condition is appropriate. So which we have to find identical testing conditions or testing environments. The tryout should be performed under the condition as identical as possible to the condition in which the final version of the test will be used. This criterion will allow test developers to minimize the risk of extraneous factors to affect the testing procedures and results. Okay, for example, exam stress. If you develop tests for exam stress and you know that this exam stress will peak during examination periods, then if you want to run the tryout, you should also collect data during examinations period. Okay, if you collect data in other times, you may not be able to gather useful information because the construct itself going to be developed or going to be portrayed during a certain period of time. So we need to find identical testing conditions or identical testing environments to ensure that we manage to gather useful data for item analysis.